Forget everything you think you know about how this works. Starting now, forget who you think you are. You're now a character in a much larger game, testing how far the limits of this reality can go. The rules of a simulation, they're not random accidents, they are designed intentionally. So because of this, the world does not have to end through natural cosmic decay over trillions of years. It could end instantly whenever the outsider flips off the switch. If someone built your universe, monitors everything that you do, if they can change the rules on the whim, they can turn the power off or on at any second, then for all practical purposes, they are a god. They are your god. Through wilderness zones, like places that are completely void of human observation and technological tracking, these represent the unrendered sectors of the simulation map. And if you want to catch the system lagging, you have to look where you aren't supposed to look. Pay attention to the background details of your daily life that you usually take for granted. Those glitches don't happen when you're staring directly at the stage. They happen in the peripheral corners of the room when the system thinks you aren't paying attention. Object tracking error. So this would be the classic lost object phenomenon where your keys maybe vanish from the counter and then reappear exactly where you looked 3 times. There's also something we could call the isolated rewrite. This would be a case of the system completely updating everything within itself, rewriting reality, but it skips you or a set of people because their specific files were disconnected from the main data stream as everything was being updated. So the glitch wouldn't be the world around you. The glitch is that you and your data profile got left behind and it's out of date. There are several specific mechanical protocols that you might be able to use to force an interaction with the outside host. Running your life like a literal equation would force the system to log your profile as pure data instead of normal human behavior. There are some heavy implications of this. Keep in mind that forcing the system to take notice of you is a very, very high stakes gamble. And the results could be amazing or they could just wipe you out of existence. Very highly influential outliers are able to ensure that the simulation's rendering budget and processing power are constantly prioritized around their profiles. Billionaires are able to embed themselves into the system. It's way, way, way more than just money equals power. It's so much more than that. Money essentially can buy you a system override and an alternate reality. Welcome to the Reality Hacking series. In this series, we'll treat different theories of reality as practical tools to find exploits in the system of life. Each episode will explore a specific quantum theory of reality. Today, I will be covering the simulation hypothesis. In this episode, we are assuming the simulation hypothesis is completely real so that we can focus entirely on ways to hack the control panel of this reality from that framework. We will talk about how the machine runs from the outside, how to act like a player, how to find the edges of the map, and how to change your daily choices to get the exact results you want out of life. So let's start off with some background information on what the simulation hypothesis is. The core premise of this hypothesis is that everything around us, the earth, the stars, our bodies, it's not a physical universe. Everything around us is a massive, highly advanced digital program that's run on a computer platform by an outside intelligence. I think the most simple way to think of this would be to think of yourself as a Sims character in a game that's being played by somebody else, played or observed by somebody else. And although this idea was popularized recently, it's not at all a new idea. I think the earliest example of this type of concept comes from Plato's cave. In ancient Greece, Plato described humans as prisoners chained inside of a cave that were only able to see shadows thrown on a wall and mistaking those shadows for the real world. And then in 1969, Conrad Zuse, who was a computer pioneer who published something called Calculating Space, he was the first to propose this idea of digital physics, which is the idea that the universe is fundamentally built on running data and computation. And then, of course, this concept heavily inspired The Matrix in 1999, and it became a major baseline for modern science fiction. If we go back to 2003, there was a philosopher named Nick Bostrom, and he really went into depth with this idea and got into the mathematical logic of it. And his argument was that if a civilization could ever become capable of creating conscious simulations, then they would generate so many simulated beings that any randomly chosen entity in the universe would almost certainly be a simulation, and that artificial minds outnumber real minds 1,000,000,000 to 1, and that you're almost certainly living in a program right now. For this video, we're going to be skipping over the debate over whether this theory is true or not. You can do your own research and come to your own conclusions, but for the rest of this video, we are assuming that this simulation hypothesis is 100% real. What that means, what that looks like in daily life, and how you can apply that to your actual, day to day. To make it easier to accept this theory as truth, I'm going to show you 3 real-world clues that show why our environment as we know it acts like a piece of running software, and why the simulation hypothesis has its legitimacy. First, think about video games. So in the 1970s, there was Pong, which was just 2 lines and a dot. Compare that to what we have today, very realistic games played live by millions of people. If you were to project that exact rate of development going forward by another 200 years, that mathematical trajectory suggests that humanity or any advanced civilization may be able to create virtual realities that are completely indistinguishable from the real world. Which then leads us right back to Nick Bostrom's trilemma that we are almost certainly living in a simulation right now. Second, consider the fact that all computer processors have a clock speed that limits how many calculations can happen per second. That is a hard limit. When you look at the universe as we understand it, that processing limit shows up as the speed of light, which is 186,000 miles per second. And as far as we know, absolutely nothing can cross that threshold. The universe also has a pixel size called the Planck length. This is the absolute smallest possible distance in physics. So just as a digital screen cannot show an image smaller than a single pixel, humans are not able to see anything smaller than this tiny Planck unit of space, which points to a fixed grid size in our software that we're potentially living in. And finally, look at how a computer program builds solid objects. Inside a digital game, a brick wall is just a line of code in the computer's memory. It has no actual physical substance. Our universe handles matter in the exact same way. When scientists zoom in to the absolute smallest parts of an atom, like an electron, they actually do not find a tiny solid ball. What they find instead is a mathematical formula that calculates the probability of where that electron might be. That particle does not sit in a solid spot until an instrument measures it. It behaves exactly like a video game that only renders a chair when your character walks into the room. And even when 2 particles are separated by millions of miles, changing one instantly changes the other because they follow these strict built-in if-then rules. So it's been established that the bedrock of our universe is not solid material. It is pure information running on a system. Okay, so let's zoom out here and observe our simulated universe from the outside perspective. Imagine you are either the creator or an outside observer watching this conscious simulation being run. So first, consider that everything is information instead of matter. So inside, everything feels solid, like rocks and trees. Those beings can touch and experience things as physical objects. But outside, none of that physical stuff actually exists. It's just data. So while the simulation characters, they will see and experience an ocean, a landscape, a sky, the sun, the stars, the person running the game or observing it from the outside sees code. And even if they do see the same imagery as the characters in the way that the game developers can see what their Sims can see, it would only be because they specifically coded it to appear that way, and they have access to the programming and they are under no illusions that any of it is real. Because it's not. It's just data. It's just code. From the outside, you would also be able to observe that the physics of the simulation are not permanent. The physics are just design choices, and from the outside control panel, they are sliders that can be adjusted. The operator can turn gravity up or down. They can change how fast light travels if they want to. The system can be paused, it can be fast-forwarded, or reloaded to an earlier save state at any moment. The operator is completely in control of the so-called physical laws of the universe, and those laws are only fixed by choice. From outside the simulation, you would also be able to observe that the simulated universe isn't self-contained or a self-powered system. It requires actual hardware and power in the reality above it. So just like a computer game needs a physical graphics card and electricity to run, a simulation depends on a machine outside of it, a machine and a power source that simulated beings can't see nor are aware of. Additionally, to save energy, the simulation would use selective rendering. It only calculates details when it needs to. If no one inside the simulation is looking at a closed room, a distant galaxy, or a specific flower in a specific garden, then the system stops tracking those atoms to save processing power. In other words, if no one in the simulation is observing a particular object or a location, then it effectively ceases to exist until someone looks at it again. To the outside observer, time is completely flexible. It depends entirely on the speed of the hardware that's running the simulation. So 1 second inside the simulation would not match 1 second outside. The operator could pause the simulation for 1,000 years from the outside, and the simulated beings, they would keep living without feeling a single second of interruption. The simulation can also start at any point with a preloaded history or a fake past. An operator could create and turn on a system today, but program it to look billions of years old. And those simulated beings could look backwards and assume that they see a long history, but not realize that the entire past was just pre-installed data loaded during startup, and that those events didn't actually unfold in the same way. Also, from the outside, a coded reality can be duplicated instantly. The outside operator can copy-paste the entire environment or just parts of it if they want to. They could run 10 versions or a million versions of the simulation at the same time, all populated by the same people with the exact same memories or altered memories if they wanted to. The operator can perform live editing. They can change the environment or modify human memories on the fly. And to the people inside, these manual edits would blend perfectly into daily life or into historical records. It could go completely without a hitch, and it would be impossible for those simulated beings to notice. But from the outside, it could just be a manual edit. And as we really take in this outsider observer point of view, you really have to consider the designer aspect of it all. The rules of a simulation, they're not random accidents. They are designed intentionally. So because of this, the world does not have to end through natural cosmic decay over trillions of years just because the simulated beings have determined that that's what makes scientific sense from their perspective. It could end instantly whenever the outsider flips off the switch. They are not bound by any rules. So before moving on to glitching and hacking the simulation, I wanted to pause here because as I was doing research, I was wondering how religion and this human concept of a divine creator is related to the simulation hypothesis. If you had to fit traditional monotheistic religion into any modern theory of reality, it's pretty clear to me that the simulation hypothesis would be the most straightforward choice. From the perspective of a person inside the simulation, the programmer is functionally identical to a god. Allow me to draw some parallels here. There's this earthly idea of God being the ultimate divine creator, which in the simulation hypothesis is functionally identical to the role of a programmer or an outside engineer. The programmer God sees all, they know all, control all, and they completely take on the role of the God of their system. Then you have the creation event, the creation story. So booting up or initializing the simulation replaces that traditional story of the creation of man. And all of those common assumptions in religious creation stories could also just be planted false histories. But again, there's this idea of everything coming from this outside, all-seeing, all-knowing creator, including the creation of everything. Then there's also this idea that God works miracles. So in the simulation, a miracle isn't a magical breaking of reality. It's just a manual intervention. It's a patch, a live edit that's made to the running simulation by the programmer God. And omniscience in religion is about an all-knowing and all-powerful God. Well, an all-knowing deity in this framework is simply an outside entity with complete access to the system's data files and history. It doesn't sound as fantastical and romantic when I put it that way, but when you really think about it, there's no functional difference. When we think about the judgment and the afterlife in religion, in the simulation, divine judgment would just be administrative control over the inhabitants' data profiles, and the afterlife would simply be transferring a consciousness file from this simulation into a different one. One key perceptual difference between traditional religion and the simulation hypothesis is that In traditional religion, God is usually viewed as eternal and morally perfect, an all loving, all caring God. But in the simulation theory, the programmer is likely a finite being, an engineer, an experimenter, perhaps a consumer of some kind of technology who makes mistakes, has resource limits, and is simply just running a piece of machinery. All right, so let's get into who exactly might be running the simulation and what their motives are. Let's just get into their heads a little bit because in order to glitch or hack a simulation, you as an inhabitant need to understand who is running it. So if the creators of this system are finite beings and not our earthly idea of perfect, all-loving, all-moral gods, then their motives could range from curious to completely cruel. And when you look at why humans run simulations in this reality that we're in now, the concept of a built reality comes kind of a little bit darker. So first you have to consider the purpose of the test. We don't simulate a billion years of people living comfortable, uneventful lives because comfort doesn't yield interesting data. Humans run simulations and experiments to study crises, wars, pandemics, economic collapses, social stress. So if our world is a simulation, it's likely designed to test how we inhabitants behave under heavy pressure and hardship. We also have to leave room for the possibility that the creators of this simulation might not care about our pain. They might be completely indifferent, or they might not even view us as human or truly conscious. This mirrors how humans treat laboratory mice, bacteria, even video game characters. We prioritize our research goals, our curiosity, our entertainment over the comfort of the system that we are testing. So it only makes logical sense that a level up would be the same type of thing happening. You also need to consider that there really is no true moral safety net. Traditional religions usually promise that the Creator is fundamentally good and loving, even when the world is full of suffering. Now, I personally always thought that this was just a human coping strategy to deal with the immense trauma of human life. But when we look at it from a simulation lens, it becomes easier to digest that the Creator may not be loving at all. The Creator could be and is most likely to be either a detached researcher, a flawed engineer, or someone running a brutal social experiment purely out of curiosity or entertainment. So keep this in mind as we discuss ways to work within a simulation. But overall, to the people inside, that difference between traditional God and the person running the simulation, it does not matter. If someone built your universe, monitors everything that you do, if they can change the rules on the whim, they can turn the power off or on at any second, then for all practical purposes, they are a god. They are your god. All right, so we've gone into some of the background of the simulation hypothesis, what it is, describe what the system would look like to the outside observer, and we've gotten into the mind and potential motivations of the entity running the simulation. But before you can manipulate a simulation to your benefit, you need to understand your environment and be able to spot specific types of areas within this system. Once you accept the simulation hypothesis as an operational truth, your relationship with your environment will fundamentally change. You should start scanning your surroundings the way an experienced game player would test a massive open world video game. Start hunting for boundaries, interfaces, and bugs. So the first thing you're going to need to look for are the invisible walls. Now, if you think about when you play a digital video game, the developers build boundaries to keep you on the map. And if you walk past those boundaries or you try to, your character freezes or the camera blocks your view or it looks like you're bumping up against an invisible structure. Now, in a simulated reality, invisible walls aren't going to be physical barriers, but instead they'll show up as computational or systemic limits. These areas are going to be hard ceilings where the system starts to struggle or actively blocks you from moving you further. So we see this in our current reality. Think about the hard limits of human travel or the massive amount of energy that's needed to push a rocket up past our upper atmosphere. It is an incredibly energy intensive, almost prohibitive barrier. But in a simulated reality on a daily scale, these invisible walls are going to show up as extreme systemic friction. When you try past a certain threshold, whether that's scaling a project, accessing hidden data networks, or entering highly restricted physical spaces, you will often get hit with a sudden, unexplainable wall of bureaucracy, systemic errors, or environmental resistance. I'm going to give you some examples, but start noticing when and where this happens in daily life. This is the system telling you that this asset is not rendered for your current profile. In other words, you are not allowed to be here. So personally, I think we see this most clearly in the stagnation of social change and historical revolutions. Think about those moments in history where a massive societal shift seems completely obvious, it feels logical, and it's almost universally desired by the population. Like, as divided as it seems like people are these days, there are still some things that everybody wants. And yet it feels really almost impossible to enact those things through any normal measures. You can have millions of people, billions, wanting, pushing for just a very simple, direct course of action. And yet it seems like the political, financial, and everything of the world, the bureaucracy of the world just locks up, it seizes up, and it absolutely prevents these very simple, basic, logical, almost fundamental things from happening. And this is what I mean when I say invisible wall. It's almost like a systemic lockup. The simulation engine is deliberately preventing it because the proposed outcome would probably violate the rules of the existing code. So that's an example of an invisible wall on maybe like a society-wide scale, but start looking for them in your own daily life at all different scales. And I think you're going to start noticing them. The second thing that you need to start looking out for are interfaces. Now, I'm going to do my best to explain what an interface is. If you need to rewind it a few times to digest it, I don't blame you because it took me a while to figure out how to explain it. But an interface is any place where information passes into or out of the simulation. In a computer program, an interface is a point where two separate systems meet and they exchange data, such as a keyboard, a USB port, or a text box on the screen. In a simulation, an interface is a physical location, an object or setup where the outside host or creator's hardware is directly injecting data, extracting data, or updating files. So let me put this in a different way. An interface in the simulation is a physical space where the creator god's outside engine is actively injecting data or running local background updates. And in this physical space, the default rules of the simulated reality have been manually overridden by a localized set of rules. So it's a very special, almost insulated type of space. And one commonality about these different types of spaces is that they are high-stress data hubs. These are places where human consciousness is pushed to its near limits and is under intense observation. So if that doesn't make sense, it's okay. I'm going to give you some examples and hopefully it becomes more clear. One of these examples, we're going to call them engineered traps. And I'm going to use the casino as the most straightforward example of this engineered trap. So these types of spaces are going to be highly engineered microenvironments. They're going to be deliberately sealed off from the rest of the world. Think of the casinos in Vegas if you've been there. Very sophisticated, very deliberate operations. There's no clocks. There's nearly no windows. There's very specific geometric layouts. There's constant ambient sound. There's very highly monitored reward loops. And at any given time, you are being observed from all different directions by all manner of people. They know everything about you and you don't even realize that you're being watched. So I'm just using a casino as like one type of example of this type of space. So within the walls of an engineered trap, standard human parameters for time, risk assessment, decision-making, these are fundamentally altered by the design of the space. All right, let's look at a different type of space. I'm going to call this type of space high bandwidth extraction hubs. Let's think of places such as hospitals or stock trading floors. The processing demand in these zones is going to be incredibly dense. These are environments where human data is generated at an extreme and volatile pace. So think about an ICU or a high-frequency stock trading floor. The simulation isn't going to be lazily rendering generic background scenery. It's very active, it's very present and current, moment to moment, and the simulation will be processing massive streams of very high-stakes data regarding matters of life and death, survival, panic, and structural collapse. All right, the next type of space we're going to look at are data vaults. So think of places like very highly secure archives or deep tech labs. These are going to be spaces that are dedicated to absolute preservation or isolation. Envision a rare manuscript archive that would store centuries old information that backs up historical timelines, or on the more scientific side of things, a highly controlled a clean room research lab that deliberately isolates physical matter down to its very, very possible smallest particles, completely free from outside contamination. So these type of spaces that are meant to be very sterile, controlled, insulated, these are also spaces where the baseline code of the simulation is forced to run at a much higher resolution in order to maintain accuracy. Again, very energy, very data intensive, these are spaces that are definitely going to be more monitored. Maybe not highly monitored all the time, but definitely more monitored than your outside generic space of the simulation. All right, the next type of space that we have here are system exceptions. So think of historical and religious sites. These would be places that, ancient monuments, battlefields, generational religious sites that function as historical coordinates in the source code. Mecca, for example, is the one that pops into my head. These are going to be areas where millions of conscious minds across centuries have concentrated intense emotion, and that emotion and that progression over time has created a permanent structural mark in the collective data layer. Let's just put it that way. And then the simulation is going to preserve these nodes with unique parameters, which is why human perception of time and memory tends to flatten or warp when standing inside of them, or at least that's what people report. All right, and the next type of space that I want you to become aware of are, let's call them unrendered baselines. An example of this would be the very, very deep wilderness that nobody ever goes into. No cell service, nothing. So true wilderness zones, like places that are completely void of human observation and technological tracking, these represent the unrendered sectors of the simulation map. And because the system does not need to constantly calculate human feedback loops or local infrastructure here, this is one of those areas where the simulation is going to drop its processing load in these places because they're not actively being observed by any of the inhabitants of the simulation most of the time. So in these zones, the code is going to be thinner, which is going to leave the environment more in its raw foundational state. And I think this is why these deep wilderness zones are notorious for high rates of unexplained activity, UFOs, lots of unexplainable missing persons cases. And I mean, when you think about it, like when that tracking data drops out, the system fails to maintain object permanence for the individuals inside of it. So if you go back to the beginning of this presentation, when I was talking about how if there's nobody observing a specific thing, then the simulation isn't necessarily rendering it. It can drop those atoms completely. So when you are walking through one of these zones that is really not being observed by anybody within the simulation, you may drop out along with everything else. So it's when you think about it that way, and then you think about all of the weird stuff that goes on in these wilderness zones, it makes sense. At least it does to me. So you're probably wondering, what do you do with these types of spaces? So as a reality hacker, specifically for a simulation, you need to look at these high intensity type of nodes, not as places to avoid, but these are system sensors. Think of them that way. These are going to be exact points where our local actions are going to create the highest spike inside of the outside engine's processing logs. So in other words, when you do a specific action inside of one of these types of places, you are going to trigger a massive spike in the system's tracking logs. Just by being in or in proximity to this type of space, you're going to force that main computer to actively calculate your choices, update your file, change the local environment to handle your actions. Versus if you just remain on the outside, on the periphery, in the park, at the grocery store, one of these more generic type of spaces that aren't as energy intensive, you're going to be hidden in the background code. You're lost in all the fluff. You're not seen. You're not visible there. However, when you step into one of these high intensity interfaces and conduct certain actions, we'll get to that later. It's basically like stepping in front of the system's lens. You're making yourself more visible just by being in proximity to all of these other more visible things. And in a few minutes, we're going to circle back to that. We're going to talk about changing your daily inputs and how to force a system reset. All right, so that brings us to the third thing that you need to start being on the lookout for, which are repeating anomalies. So I want you to start tracking repeatable anomalies. So if you are a practitioner of the esoteric, if you're into magic or witchcraft, or someone who has spent time studying UFOs or the paranormal, this might require a bit of a shift in your worldview. You're going to have to stop looking at weird events as magical, miracles, spooky. The moment we just reduce something to, oh, it's supernatural, oh, it's magic. Like, yes, I know intuitively we know it's more than that, but give it a little bit more credit in the way that you describe it with your words. The moment we call something supernatural, we tend to give up our ability to fully analyze it. So instead, you're going to start looking at these events with a data collector's eye, whether it's a ghost, an odd synchronicity, an unexplainable physical event. Start treating these not as spiritual mysteries. Look at them as actual repeatable inconsistencies. They are software bugs. They are events that violate physical laws as we understand them. They are information that appears in the system without a clear cause. There are sudden contradictions in recorded history, but avoid calling them supernatural. So in order to find the control panel, you need to start logging these anomalies. Keep a notebook. Track the exact context of odd occurrences that you notice. What was the exact time? What was your internal biological state? Who was in the room? What were the local weather conditions or electromagnetic variables? Anything else you saw weird in the news that might coincide? Is there anything significant that happened recently? In software engineering, a developer cannot fix or exploit a bug until they know how to recreate it. So that's what you're trying to do here. Log them, look for the recurring variables, isolate the patterns, and you will begin to understand the source code. All right, and then one more thing I want you to look out for, and it's something that most people are going to completely miss. Look for rendering bottleneck. We've stated before, a massive simulation cannot load every single detail at the exact same resolution all the time. It would crash the hardware. It's really relying on your brain's peripheral limits to save processing power. So because of this, the edges of the map are often hidden right in front of you, and they're masked by your own cognitive blind spots. Your brain's already doing a lot of the work and filling in a lot of the stuff for the system anyway. So if you want to catch the system lagging, you have to look where you aren't supposed to look. Pay attention to the background details of your daily life that you usually take for granted. Look at the specific texture of a wall that you walk past every day. Pay attention to the background ambient noise of the room, or the exact split-second transition that happens when you open a door into a dark, empty space. Those glitches don't happen when you're staring directly at the stage. They happen in the peripheral corners of the room when the system thinks you aren't paying attention. So see if you can catch those lags. Okay, so now we're getting into the really good stuff. Up until this point, we've been mapping out how the simulation is built. We've looked at how the engine runs, how it builds solid objects out of pure information, and where the interfaces are hidden in plain sight. So now we're going to move past the theory and get into the actual execution and mechanics of how you hack or exploit this system. Let's talk about how you might get a message out. So think of it like a character inside a simulation trying to get the attention of the operator that's sitting at the control panel on the outside. If the programmer built this system to allow data to pass back out of our layer, then there are several specific mechanical protocols that you might be able to use to force an interaction with the outside host. And just to note, I may use a variety of different terms to refer to the outside operator. I may say creator, creator god, programmer, operator, host. I'm just referring to whoever's on the outside controlling the simulation. So if you want to get the attention of the creator and force a response, then you're going to have to use the system's own resource limits against it. So let's discuss a few ways to do this. The first method we're going to call pattern breaking. So if you think about it, a simulation engine optimizes for very predictable data paths. Every day, there's billions of human profiles executing highly repetitive linear loops, such as you wake up at the same time every day, you take the same route to work, you scroll the same digital feeds, you buy the same brands, you go to sleep around the same time. And eventually this data becomes very predictable, and then the system can just very lazily pre-render your entire day or predict your entire day using very minimal processing power. Because let's be honest, most people follow a very predictable routine day to day, whether they realize it or not. So if you want to trigger an automated alert in the host hardware, you're going to have to do the exact opposite of this. You're going to need to create an extremely unusual, completely random environmental pattern that the system's predictive algorithms are not going to expect. So, on a smaller individual day to day level, here's an example of how you could introduce pure nonlinear chaos into your life. Let's say you pack a bag, use a random number generator to pick a spot 50 miles away from you. Use that number generator to pick the coordinates. Then you go to that spot and you spend the day doing things completely outside of your normal routine. Something like this will force the simulation to very quickly load a whole new behavioral profile for you and a brand new environment for you. And in this example, the purpose of the random number generator would be to introduce true, genuine mathematical randomness into your life, where it chooses the path that even you couldn't predict. That would then catch the world's default script off guard, force it to scramble, and build a completely new reality around you. You will then, at that point, become a localized anomaly. So that's an example on a smaller scale. But if you want a massive spike that the operator will actually personally notice, you're going to have to scale it up. This is where large groups of people organizing may come into play. So when hundreds or thousands or even more groups of individuals synchronize their behavior to execute a highly specific, unexpected action at the exact same moment, it creates a huge data spike and it acts like a coordinated glitch. At that point, the host hardware suddenly faces a huge processing demand that it hadn't previously budgeted for, and that would automatically flag the system for administrative review. Now, of course, this is all hypothetical. How would we get everybody on board to conduct this synchronized action all at one time? Your guess is as good as mine. I don't think something like a TikTok trend would do the trick because that in and of itself is already highly algorithmic and not random enough. So I don't think that that would work in this capacity. Now, this does bring up an interesting question of an outlier advantage. Do the elites of our system, the outliers, the hyper wealthy, hyper influential, the central planners, the Elon Musks, the Sam Altmans, the Donald Trumps, etc., do those people have a competitive advantage here? And the answer would be a resounding yes. They are almost certainly already engaging in this, whether they call it simulation hacking or not. I mean, simply think about how the world's most powerful people operate. They don't live inside our standard social scripts. They make massive market moving decisions on a whim. They manipulate global data networks. They orchestrate synchronized behavior across millions of people through media and industry, through the introduction of new technologies, through financial moves. So, by constantly breaking these default human patterns on a massive scale, these very highly influential outliers are able to ensure that the simulation's rendering budget and processing power are constantly prioritized around their profiles. And that makes the system force itself to continually adapt to the local environment to handle their high bandwidth inputs, which naturally makes the code bend and work more in their favor. So in this sense, the elites, they're not just playing the game, they're hogging our simulation system memory. And if that sounds unfair, that's because it is on a very fundamental level. All right, so the second method to get the attention of the creator of the simulation is by using mathematical signals. So math is the literal source code. It's the literal language of the simulation. If you want to talk to the people outside, instead of using spoken language, English, French, Arabic, emotional appeals, you're going to have to use raw numbers. That's the universal language of the universe. So if you wanted to use math in order to reach the creator, you would have to inject highly complex mathematical sequences into deep space or into massive global data networks. But you wouldn't just be transmitting random numbers. You'd need to broadcast foundational constants, prime numbers, advanced geometric algorithms. Think of things like the Fibonacci sequence, pi, complex fractal equations, all of that rendered in binary code. So how would someone might achieve this? I mean, it wouldn't be easy. Like, on a large scale, this would be like what projects like SETI, which is the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, this is what they're doing when they beam targeted mathematical pulses into space, or what deep tech labs do when they run massive, repetitive, algorithmic computations across global server networks. Now, to do it on an everyday smaller scale, there's ways that you and I can do this. We can do this by forcing raw math into our routines or into our technology. So one example would be to change your habits in a math-based way. So you would stop organizing your day with how you feel and use strict number sequences instead. So you could structure your time, tasks, budget around prime numbers or the Fibonacci sequence. And running your life like a literal equation would force the system to log your profile as pure data instead of normal human behavior. Sounds a little crazy, but if you're the type of person who feels like you need to shake things up a little bit and like things are getting a little bit repetitive and you don't know what to do different in life, run it as an experiment. There's no reason not to. Another way that you could do this on a smaller scale would be to use your home computer to run free background programs to search for massive prime numbers or solve complex math puzzles. And I'll put some resources in the description if you're interested in running a program like this. But by letting your machine constantly feed heavy math back into the global network, you're going to make your specific location, your apartment, your home, wherever your computer is, you're going to make that specific location a very constant, unignorable blip on the system's data logs. So essentially what this method does with speaking to trying to speak to the operator using mathematical language is that the system's monitoring software is going to recognize that the data you're sending out, it's not generic noise, it's not random human chatter, it's structured code trying to talk back to the outside computer, which automatically flags the transmission for observation. So keep in mind that the real risk and the real limit here isn't whether the system sees you, it's going to be how or if the operator responds or reacts. The response could be an automated patch or it could be an active intervention. If it's an automated patch, if the system is fully automated, then even if the simulation sees you, the engine might just treat your pattern-breaking communication as a temporary glitch and run a silent background update to fix the environment around you. And that would then stabilize the code without the operator ever having to look at your file. But on the other hand, if it's an active intervention, if your signal is complex and persistent enough, that would cross a threshold from a standard error to a critical system alert. And that may force the operator to examine the glitch and decide whether to override the local rules for you or to reset your parameters entirely. So there are some heavy implications of this. Keep in mind that forcing the system to take notice of you is a very, very high stakes gamble in this entire framework of reality. The results could be amazing or they could just wipe you out of existence. When a programmer notices that a piece of code is not behaving as they expected it to and is causing errors or problems, they're not necessarily going to spend hours trying to politely debug it just to preserve it. They might patch it, roll it back, or delete it. And when I'm talking about a piece of code, I'm talking about you, the human. You are a piece of code, remember. So with that in mind, imagine you've successfully pinged the operator. You've gotten their attention and you've managed to prompt an administrative review from them. There's a couple ways this could go. The most favorable outcome of this, I'm going to call it the rule override or like hitting the jackpot. This is when the operator manually reviews your code and then adjusts the environmental variables around your profile as in your life. So because your data file is causing too much noise, they would then make the local rules bend to make you quiet again. So this might manifest as sudden, statistically impossible luck, a massive financial windfall out of nowhere. Maybe you had an incurable or unexplainable disease that vanishes, a sudden, inexplicable clearing of a massive bureaucratic hurdle. But this would essentially be the system operator programming a cheat code into your life so that it can get you back into a stable and predictable state. Now, why would the operator choose to help you out instead of just wiping your file or patching you over? I don't know, but an educated guess based on basic software design principles would point to efficiency. Remember, to the operator, you're just a piece of code. They're not going to do things out of warmth or emotion. They're going to do what's most efficient for them and for the experiment that they're running. Sometimes deleting or resetting a file takes up processing power, especially if that file is deeply connected to everything else around it. So in this case, it may just be more efficient to adjust the variables around you, adjust your life environment instead. So if you want the operator to choose a rule override instead of a hard reset, assuming that you're able to make contact and get the attention of the operator, there's a couple ways that you could tilt the odds into your favor. One would be to make yourself load-bearing data. So this would be that you make yourself a positive, indispensable part of your local environment. If you're deeply connected to your community and you're constantly driving value into the local network, your local environment, then deleting your profile might cause a massive ripple effect, and it would corrupt hundreds of other files that are connected to you. So in this case, to avoid that extra processing headache, the operator might just give you what you want in order to keep the system running smoothly. So again, let me reframe what we're talking about here. You, as a piece of data, if you are indispensable to many things in your environment, it's going to be a lot harder for that operator to simply delete you without causing a lot of downstream problems. So make yourself indispensable to your environment in any way that you can. Be a pillar of your community in any way that you can. And this might be what ancient concepts like karma actually are, system stability algorithms. Okay, so the second way that you could potentially influence the operator to grant your life an exception or rule override instead of a patch or deletion would be to make yourself high value data. You could do this by living a life of extreme novelty, deep creativity, or creating completely unique ideas. In software, if a script is producing some very fascinating data, you as a programmer don't just delete it, you would leave it running to see what it does next. So as a human, by breaking out of a boring human routine and doing something that's truly original, your life becomes a high value data stream. And then this increases the likelihood that if you do get in contact with the operator, if you do get them to notice you, they would throw you a lucky break just to keep the experiment of your life running as smoothly as possible. The third way would be to load an archetype. Now, this could be a little bit of a shortcut. So instead of trying to write your own chaotic life script from scratch, you can copy let's say, a pre-written template. So historical archetypes like the trickster, the rebel, the icon, the hero, these are basically massive ancient software libraries deeply embedded into our reality's code. So if you were to study and align your life perfectly with one of these very classic templates, then the system doesn't have to calculate your path from scratch. It'll just load the pre-existing script, and then that will give you access to the built-in miraculous escape or impossible twist or, sudden rise to fame that are already programmed into those archetypes. And if you're interested, I have a video on Kim Kardashian that kind of explains how she may be utilizing this in her own life. It's really interesting, and I think it would also make a lot of light bulbs go off for you. All right, and the fourth way to be potentially granted an exemption once you are able to make contact with the operator, we're going to call this the poison pill. Now, this is a high-risk play, and this is a very dark, high-stakes play. So instead of being helpful, you would weave your assets, your secrets, your dependencies so deeply into the baseline rules of your environment that you then become too dangerous and too risky to delete. So even if the system tried to force a hard reboot or reset on you, it would risk crashing the local network, wiping out an entire sector of valuable data. So the operator, they would look at your glitching file, realize that you've effectively held your local code hostage, and decide that it's safer to just give you a rule override to pacify you. Just give you what you want. Now, we see this happen in the real world all the time when individuals rig their personal survival to the survival of the system itself. One example would be J. Edgar Hoover. He was the head of the FBI, and he survived 8 presidents by compiling secret files on the private lives of the entire political elite. And he wove his data so deeply into the establishment that firing him or getting rid of him meant risking a leak that would collapse the whole government network. Or Jeffrey Epstein would be another example of this. He archived the deeper secrets of billionaires and world leaders, and he turned his profile into an undeletable virus. And I mean, undeletable, it's actually still up for debate, depending on who you ask. But the system handed him a massive legal rule override for many decades because exposing him meant exposing the corrupted code of the global elite. And I think this is obviously still at play in multiple levels and probably even worse than we realize. I think Elon Musk is another example of this. His companies control the literal communication and space infrastructure used by global militaries and governments. And so his personal assets are woven directly into national security. The system cannot easily shut him down without crashing its own vital functions. So, money is power, yes, but it's more than that. When you think about how billionaires are able to embed themselves into the system, it's way, way, way more than just money equals power. It's so much more than that. Money essentially can buy you a system override and an alternate reality. Again, all of these examples that I just gave you here, these are just ways to nudge the system towards the best case scenario of granting your life, aka your system environment, an override once you've been noticed by the operator. But a best case scenario is not always guaranteed. The less favorable outcome, if you got the operator's attention, would be if the operator decided that your file is corrupted and they simply roll your profile back to a previous backup state or a default baseline. So this might mean the complete and sudden collapse of your current life. Your projects might fail, your relationships abruptly dissolve, maybe you experience this profound shift where your old identity and your desires and memories feel completely alien to you. Absent any other reasonable explanations, maybe something very unusual and catastrophic happens in your life that puts you back years in progress. But essentially, the system forces a hard reboot to clear the error, or you might be deleted altogether. So, because we don't specifically know all the rules of this system, the only way to figure out how parts of the code are written is to run tests. Use the information that I'm providing in this video to poke reality and see if or where the pixels tear. And you can see tears everywhere if you look closely enough. We can find them in history as miracles, missing eras of time, system patches, and they're happening right now at CERN as we force the hardware to calculate infinite mass at the speed of light. But again, remember, trying to force a system-wide crash from your living room is a massive risk. And if you aggressively trigger errors without a clear purpose, then the system flags your profile as a glitch or virus. It could quarantine your account, cut off your access to money, health, luck, to protect the global data layer. So because of that, I wouldn't recommend to take that approach. Instead of trying to crash the code in order to get noticed, I would say use it to your advantage, which will bring us to the next part where we're going to talk about changing your inputs. So now that we know how this system works, what should we be doing in it? That's what I mean when I say changing your inputs. How can we change our behaviors and our actions within this simulation to get the outputs that we want? Every goal that you have, which is whether it's money, health, better options, it's just an output. So let's take a look at some possible daily steps that you could take to get into the right environments, get past unexplainable roadblocks, and then just spot some hidden gaps in your daily routine. And again, we're doing all of this under the framework of this reality being a simulation and how we can change our actions within this reality to our own benefit. So one thing you're going to have to change is your overall mindset. Every single goal, whether it's a good job, money, health, great relationships, fame, a huge social circle, deep knowledge, wisdom, it's not a moral reward. It's not a stroke of luck. You're going to have to start thinking of these as just software outputs that are generated by specific inputs. So you're going to need to stop asking, why do people get these things? Why do some people have this and other people don't have it? Just start reverse engineering the exact variables that the system rewards to get them. And you can do this by observing the people that do have those things and how they got there. And I'm not even saying that the people that do have those things that you want have consciously achieved those outputs, but their inputs have given them that in return. So you're going to have to learn from the input output of what you see going on in their life. The next mindset shift that you're going to need in order to optimize yourself for a simulation is to drop the argument with reality. Stop expecting fairness from a system that optimizes for rules instead of equity. The rules are the rules. You did not write them and you cannot change them. All you can do is figure them out and then exploit them to your benefit. And keep in mind that complaining about human nature or how physics works is literally a waste of your processing power. So the less time and energy that you spend on feeling a sense of frustration or injustice over it, the more processing power that you're going to have available for literally everything. You're also going to need to put pragmatism over belief. So what you personally feel about the rules doesn't matter. If the system rewards persistence, adaptability, skill, you either align with those mechanics or you fail. Your value judgment on them does not change that at all. The next mindset shift is to start looking for force multipliers. Look for places where you can find leverage. This means stop pushing on walls, stop trying to break down walls, and instead just look for doors. It's so much easier, it's so much more efficient. Look for roads that are already traveled through instead of trying to forge your own, especially if there's a low return on investment for forging a brand new path for something. Think in scalable systems. Build things that can work for you or that can eventually work for you without constant supervision. Also, think in networks. Consider that you're the average of the people whose data you're around most, who you're most connected to. And when you position yourself near these people who already control large opportunities, then your own possibilities are closer and they expand automatically. Also, prioritize rarer or deeper skills than what the average person possesses. When you can do something that almost nobody else can, then you become a higher priority asset. And then the system and the people within it will naturally gravitate towards you because your capability will become a shortcut for them. So these are all different ways to think about adding force multipliers into your life. Another thing that you can start doing is to become obsessed with feedback. Recognize that the system is constantly sending you signals and become hyper observant of things like momentum versus friction. Which actions in your life cause drag and slow down progress versus which ones supercharge you ahead and create ease? And the answer to these might not be obvious, which is why you need to start writing and documenting everything because you're really only going to be able to see these patterns in hindsight after they've accumulated for a period of time. Start paying attention to people and environments. Who in your life, what types of people, and which environments consistently correlate with new options and doors being opened up. This is also why it's important to switch up your routine out of the norm every so often because there's entire sectors of the map that you haven't even rendered for yourself yet. And within those sectors of the map, there's countless locked paths in that code that you won't ever discover until you change your trajectory and you force the system to reveal them to you. Also, start treating failures in life as a diagnostic report. A failed project, a breakup, a rejection. It's not a verdict on your worth as a person. It is simply and only data. So learn to strip the emotional response out of it so that you can iterate and reiterate again and again without needing to emotionally recover from every failure or rejection in life. If anything, start seeing rejections as really valuable data because it literally is. It gives you an opportunity to see what went wrong, what went right, which variables need to be changed for the next time. That's it. That's all rejection is. Also, start viewing your attention as currency. In an information-based environment, what you look at is what you interface with. So aggressively protect your attention as a limited resource. Cut out synthetic outrage and random noise. All right, now let's talk about activating some protocols or actions that you can take in order to manipulate the simulation to your benefit. So if you remember earlier in this video, I mapped out where the simulation's hidden boundaries and data hubs and visual blind spots are located. So once you start to recognize these types of interfaces in the world around you, you can alter your life's trajectory by actively engaging with these specific points using certain rules. So let's circle back to interacting with interfaces. So as we discussed earlier, interfaces are high-intensity real-world environments like casinos, hospitals, major trading floors, places where the baseline rules of the world are heavily concentrated and monitored. They're high energy, high data hubs. So what do we do with these places once we've identified them? Well, simply hanging out near one of these zones isn't enough to change anything. To actually leverage a high bandwidth node like this, you're going to need to take a massive high stakes action or make a defining decision for yourself while you're physically standing inside that space. So for example, you don't just visit the core of a global financial district or a historical hub just to look around. You're going to sit in that environment and do things like sending a critical pitch email, signing a contract that alters your career, or finalizing a major blueprint. Actions that are important to your life, to your goals, try and conduct them inside one of these types of hubs. If you're trying to break an old habit or make a massive lifestyle pivot, don't do it at home. You go to one of these high stress, high resolution interface environments or an ancient and emotionally charged historical monument to firmly lock in that choice. And taking action inside of these types of interface environments will route your input through what we would consider a priority port, force the simulation engine to immediately calculate your new variables, update your life's data profile right on the spot. Now, an interface like a deep wilderness zone, that would require kind of an opposite approach. And if you remember, these are unrendered sectors where the code is thin and tracking data drops and things tend to kind of just disappear from existence. You don't go there to inject high stakes choices. You would go there to kind of clear your your profile's cookies or cache. In a space like this, you could plan major life shifts and start with a totally blank slate. And for my practitioners out there, think of this as a space to do cleansing or clearing type rituals. All right. And if we go back to the concept of the invisible walls and interacting with them. So when you find these invisible walls, and you'll know you've bumped up against one when there's certain things in life that seem to be impossible to achieve, even though logically it should be reasonably easy. So when every logical effort fails, at that point, you need to stop pushing entirely. And you execute a system reset by completely abandoning the trajectory for a set period of time and then taking a highly random action. That could be like changing locations via a coin toss, breaking your biological routines, shifting your social circles. This is where the random number generators, in order to make certain decisions, comes into play. This will force the simulation to drop its tracking focus of your old file and reallocate processing power to your new, chaotic, unpredictable data. And then going back to the concept of rendering bottlenecks, as we discussed earlier, rendering bottlenecks occur because the world cannot load every single piece of detail at maximum resolution all the time. So to save processing power, the system only fully renders what someone is observing directly at that time. And it relies on your natural blind spots to keep the background running in a lower resolution. But you can target a rendering bottleneck by deliberately pulling your focus away from the main stage of your environment. So when you walk into a room or a high-stakes business meeting, a crowded social space, ignore the primary distraction or whatever it is that's asking for your attention, and then instead start actively tracking the background details that you usually take for granted. So again, this would be things like very faint ambient noise in the room, very fine details, textural details of the wall, behavior of people in the background that others aren't really noticing. But by forcing your mind to look where you're not supposed to look in that situation, you're going to strip away that polished presentation of the room. And this is going to give you two big advantages. You're going to instantly see the raw, real dynamics of your environment without any sensory manipulation, and you're going to break the system's predictive tracking loop. Remember, the system is expecting you to follow these scripts, and that's what saves it processing power. So when you refuse to do that through your focus, you're going to loosen your data profile. You're going to make the local environment far more receptive when you suddenly decide to make a major move or introduce a new choice. Again, anytime you deviate away from your simulation profile's predicted script, that forces the system to pay more attention to you and provide more resources for your unexpected actions. So making moves that aim to achieve your life goals over the layer of unpredictable actions is going to provide you with more resources energetically. It's going to move you out of the background and force the environment to start actively responding to you. All right, finally, let's talk about glitches, how to read them, and why they matter. So if you remember, a glitch is a sign that the system is lagging, and glitches can occur for many reasons, but as we've discussed, they can also occur when the rules of the simulation are bending, when tracking drops, or if you are being handed a massive life advantage. So being able to read and sense when these anomalies are occurring is useful for a couple of reasons. First, glitches prove that your new inputs or behavioral changes are working in the way that you intended. So when you change your routines or you enter new environments, the system has to scramble to recalculate your entire profile and your life path. And in a simulation with limited resources, it can't do that instantly. So if you experience weird coincidences or tiny bugs, then this might be a sign that you've successfully broken out of your old loop and then forced the environment to re-render your environment. Glitches can also signal the perfect time to strike. When the system lags, its default resistance drops and the predictable rules of your life are going to be temporarily down. So if you've been waiting to make a move like launching a business, leaving a bad situation, or making a massive life pivot, do this when you spot these lags. Third, glitches can show you which paths in life are dead ends. So when you start to see heavy repetition or robotic behavior from the people or the places around you, it might mean that that sector of your life is running on a cheap automated script. So one common example of this would be if you find yourself getting caught into the same banal, repetitive, shallow conversations in certain places or with certain people, those are dead ends. And recognizing this will keep you from wasting your limited energy trying to build a future in an environment that has nothing real to offer you. So now let's talk about some different ways to spot and measure how much friction you're causing or you are witnessing in the world around you. We're going to talk about the different tiers of glitches and what they might mean. So, level one glitch. Let's call these micro lags. These would be something like repetitive deja vu, spotting the exact same stranger 3 times in different parts of town, common but still odd synchronicities or coincidences that really strike you as like just being unusual. Maybe seeing a digital clock flickering on a strange number before it snaps back to normal. These are all things that we've all experienced before, and they kind of stick in our mind a little bit, but then we always come up with a very rational explanation for them. When you spot this type of a glitch, what this might mean is that the local environment around you is struggling to track your movements because you're breaking out of your predictable daily routine. So, level two glitch, let's call this the data mismatch. So, the biggest example of this would be the Mandela effect, where millions of people clearly remember a historical detail one way, but then records refute that and say something completely different. Or when close family members remember a major life event in completely opposite ways. Now, what this could mean is that the system updated the local map, but then forgot to or hasn't yet synced everyone's individual files. So then we have a memory flip or a data mismatch there. A level three glitch would be an object tracking error. So this would be the classic lost object phenomenon where your keys maybe vanish from the counter and then reappear exactly where you looked 3 times, or a building that seems to have a different number of windows depending on the angle that you look at it, or something that just vanished from your home that you never see again and you're the only one that lives there, things like that. What this could mean is that the physical room itself is lagging a few seconds behind your rapid focus shifts. And as we've discussed before, if you happen to be in an interface zone where there isn't a whole lot of human observation happening, it's possible that the disappearance of something could be explained by the lack of tracking and its atoms just accidentally dropping out of existence. A level four glitch would be an automated loop. So this would be when you see strangers constantly repeating the exact same generic phrases to you all day, a crowd of people unconsciously synchronizing their walking pace down to the exact footsteps sometimes, a crowd of people that kind of all look the same, they're wearing the same outfit, just very NPC type environments. What this might mean is that that specific environment is running a low energy automated background script. And it's a sign that there's no real opportunity or leverage for you there. It's time to move to a new sector. And like we've discussed before, it's important to make sure that you're not part of that group. Don't be part of the background noise. All right, a level five glitch would be, let's call this is the rendering bottlenecks that we spoke of before. So what you might see would be something like sudden heavy fog that would isolate a single city block for no weather-related reason, or peripheral details that look strangely blurry until you turn your head to stare directly at them. So this would mean that the system is saving processing power and the background rules are completely unguarded. And that, when you see that, something like that, that would mean that's the perfect time to make an unpredictable move without running into systemic pushback. All right, then we have a level six glitch, physics bugs. So this would present as something extremely rare, broken atmospheric phenomenon, reflections in a window that seem to move a split second independent of you, or a day where gravity and friction feel strangely light. Now, most people have not ever experienced this before. Again, these are all theoretical, hypothetical, and what they would mean if they occurred. But in this case, something like this, where the rules of our reality, the physics holding things together, seem to have just adjusted just a little bit. What that might mean is that the baseline rules of the environment are temporarily offline or they're glitched out. Okay, so now we're really getting into the realm of the unreal and real, just like out there. But a level 7 glitch would be a time slippage. So this would be something like experiencing the same 10 minutes twice in a row, or receiving a text message on your phone an hour before the timestamp says it was actually sent, or just incongruencies with time. And then what this might mean is that the simulation's master clock is out of sync with your personal timeline. And if this were to occur, you could consider this a high leverage moment where your actions could actually outrun the usual consequences. A level 8 glitch would be a copy and paste error. So what you might see is something like running into 3 different people with the exact same rare name and same outfit in a single afternoon, or separate houses in a neighborhood having identical structural cracks or interior layouts. And so what this might mean is that the system is running out of unique variations for your current path. It might be a sign that your life has become too predictable. And in that case, your life would then require a massive injection of some kind of a randomness. A level 9 glitch would be a system sync. What you might see here would be something like a very unbelievable, life-altering coincidence where the entire world suddenly just bends to align perfectly with a specific thought or decision that you just made. Wouldn't that be amazing? But what that would mean is that a massive background update is being forced onto your life profile, and the system is aggressively rewriting your environment to match your new level of intention. And a level 10 glitch, so we could call this a system shock or like a full system reset. So what you might experience in this case would be like a massive collective shock that would completely shatter daily routines globally. Something that would make everyday life feel entirely surreal, detached. It kind of rewrites life overnight. And so this, of course, would mean that the old loop is entirely dead and that the reality has been forced into a complete reset, and the playing field is pretty much leveled for anybody that's paying attention and ready to strike. Now, I don't think this is so rare. You could consider pandemics, major financial collapses, plagues along these lines. So I do wonder if this is maybe perhaps one of the more common glitches, if we could call it that we as humans experience. There's also something we could call the isolated rewrite. This would be a case of the system completely updating everything within itself, rewriting reality, but it skips you or a set of people because their specific files were disconnected from the main data stream as everything was being updated. So the glitch wouldn't be the world around you. The glitch is that you and your data profile got left behind and it's out of date. And, without going too far off of the topic, just the way some people have described about how they feel about life, the world, themselves after the pandemic a couple years ago, it really makes you wonder. I should probably make separate videos for some of these side topics, but it does sound like something like that could have happened because there's a lot of people that there's a pre-world and there's a post-world, and some people are just they're feeling like something has shifted and you can't really put your finger on it, and it's more than inflation and it's more than any of that, but nobody can really quite tell exactly what it is. So the reality of the situation is that the most powerful simulation isn't built out of brick and mortar or servers. The simulation is really built out of your automated habits, your daily routines, and these blind spots that your mind uses to coast through life. The simulation doesn't need to force you to follow a script if your own brain is running it automatically. All of these protocols that we've discussed, whether it's observing background details, identifying and acting within high-intensity interface zones, injecting math into your life, it's not simply about trying to glitch an external machine. It's about breaking the automated loops of your own mind. And when you finally step off of your predicted track, your current default reality will have to adjust to hold you. Now remember, simulation theory is only episode 1 of this reality hacking series. There are going to be far deeper layers to explore. And the intention is to break down the mechanics of different realities piece by piece. But theory alone is not going to change your life or your data profile. Action will. So what I've taken from this episode in my own life, I'm going to be running a live case study, and I'm going to be taking some of the actionable advice in this video and stepping out of my own predicted script. I'm going to start inviting mathematical randomness into my daily choices, among the other things that we've discussed today. And I will be tracking these metrics. I'm going to be logging these friction points and documenting exactly what happens to the environment when I stop playing along. And I hope to share that with you moving forward. So in the meantime, if you enjoy this type of content, please subscribe and go ahead and save the reality hacking playlist so that you can follow along when I upload new episodes. I'll see you for episode 2.